Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Hope you are all well. Welcome to our next journey, our next video, where we are looking at this very famous tradition, this hadith in Bukhari of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he first received revelation. Now, in the previous videos in this series, we looked at the initial stage when the Prophet was in the cave and how the angel Gabriel visited the Prophet in the cave. What I want to do now is to move on to the next section of this hadith, which is like a story in many ways, where the Prophet has now made his way back home to his wife, Khadijah. May God be pleased with her. So it says here that فرجع بها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يرجف فؤاده. That he comes back to his wife. He comes back with this revelation, these first few verses of the Quran, and he's in a state of shock, right? His heart's pounding. He doesn't quite know what has happened. This bizarre, out of this world experience that the Prophet has just gone through. So he goes to his wife as any husband would do. فَدَخَلَ عَلَى خَدِيجَةَ بِنْتْ خُوَيْلِدٍ. He came to Khadija, his wife. Her name is Khadija, daughter of Khuwaylid, radiallahu anha. May may Allah be pleased with her. And he says to her, Zammiluni, Zammiluni, cover me. I'm in a state of shock, cover me. فَزَمِّلُوهُ حَتَّى ذَهَبَ عَنْهُ الرَّوْحُ. That she covered her husband with some cloth, and this fear calmed down. He found his composure, and he told Khadija what had happened, right? And he says that I fear for myself, right? I fear that something might happen to me. لَقَدْ خَشِيتُ عَلَى نَفْسِي. That I fear that some harm or something might happen to me because I've experienced something really, really bizarre, something that's never happened to me before, right? And an out of this world experience. So something might happen to me. So let's, before we move on with the actual conversation here with the hadith, let's just talk a little bit about Khadija. May Allah be pleased with her. She was the first wife of the Prophet, but she was also the first believer in terms of believing in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And she's also the mother of the believers. As Muslims, we call her Ummul Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers. And the ulama are generally agreed, like I said, that she was the first believer. She was the first person to embrace this faith, this religion of Islam as well. And many ulama mentioned this as well. She was known to be very pious, but she also had something else that was to her advantage, which was that she was very wealthy. She was very prosperous as well, and she was also from the tribe of Quraysh, which is the same tribe, if you like, of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So, like I said, she was very pious. She was extremely wealthy as well. And her lineage, if you were to trace her lineage, it would actually meet with the lineage of the Prophet at Qusay. We have this lineage of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Scholars debate how, at certain points, how authentic it is, but it reaches all the way back to the first human, the Prophet Adam, peace be upon him. But in any case, they meet at a certain point, which is under the name of Qusay. And she'd been married before. So she was a widow, in other words. Her first marriage was to someone called Hala bin Zarara, Abu Hala bin Zarara Taymi. So that was her first husband. And she had two children, Hind and Hala, with him. Um, and then they also later on, actually, her two children became Muslim later on as well. And then her second marriage, if you like, was to someone called Atiq bin Aiz Makhzumi, right? And she had a daughter with him called Hind, right? And she also later on embraced Islam as well. And then she obviously became a widow um, for the second time. and she married the Prophet, peace be upon him. It's very, very interesting. And at some point in the future, we'll talk about this marriage with Khadijah. The Prophet married, the first woman he married was a woman who had been widowed twice, right? So this is the Prophet, peace be upon him. There's something to be said about, especially in our culture where women who might be divorced or women who might be widows are sometimes looked at differently, right? They are somehow made to go through enhanced checks, right? Here, the Prophet has married this woman, Khadijah, the mother of the believers, who's been a widow for two times as well. So, anyway, she is the first wife of the Prophet, and she is the one that the Prophet goes to when he goes through his out of this world experience, right? And so he's filled with fear. Ar-raw, the word here, ar-raw, is a sense of fear, right? That he was overwhelmed with fear as well. And then he told her what had happened. This is فَأَخْبَرَهَا الْخَبْرِ. This is in Arabic, we call this a jumla haliya. I won't go into it. Um, but then she hears this from her husband, that I fear for myself. What does she say? And this is worth reflecting upon. فقالت خديجة, Khadija said, كلا والله ما يخزيك الله أبدا. That no, never. God will never, God will never disgrace you. Then she mentions five things that support her claim, right? So, often we make a claim. What's the evidence? So, this is a form of interesting logic here, that you've made a claim, you've made a point. What's your evidence? And she mentions five things, and I'm going to go through them one by one with you. And I want you to think about what's common about these five things, right? She's not talking about, how pious he is. Of course, he was, or how good he is for himself or to his wife, but he's talking about how good he was to society, and in particular, those who are less fortunate in society, what we might call the disenfranchised in society, and his care and his concern for fellow human beings. So the first thing she says to him is that, what do you do? Innaka la tasir rahim. That, look, or prophet, or husband, you keep good relations with people, right? With your family. You maintain that with your family, right? Um, and you keep those relationships with your family, your cousins, your uncles, your aunties, your nieces, your nephews, whoever it may be. You do that. Why would God forsake you? Why would you be harmed when you go out of your way, O Prophet of God, to maintain them? And it's worth reflecting in our society where, the family unit is being taken apart, right? And the way our society is heading, completely juxtaposed to the way the Prophet taught us that we should maintain relationships with our family members, right? Our kith and kin. And what's the result of that? God will never forsake you. So it's about maintaining the fabric, the connections with your cousins, your relatives as well. So this is what he says, right? Um, and you keep husn suluk with everyone. Then she said the second thing that you do, وَتَحْمِلُ الْكَلْ, that you help the poor and destitute. You help those who are overburdened, right? Those who are overburdened, those who may be in debt. You're helping those who are weak in society. Then she says the third thing, وَتَكْسِبُ الْمَعْدُومِ, right? And you help those who have nothing, who've lost something, right? تَكْسِبُ الْمَعْدُومِ comes from the word kasab, kasaba yaksibu, which is a zaraba verb. And ma'doom means like they've got nothing, right? Like they've lost everything. So you help those who are in extreme poverty. Taksib means to acquire something, ma'doom means to lose something. So you help those who have lost everything, right? You help them gain back some sort of dignity, some sort of wealth as well, right? That you help them. So this is what the Prophet is doing. She says, look, you would never be forsaken by God because you help those who are in extreme poverty, right? It's worth remembering that our Prophet was not a king prophet, right? He lived himself a life of austerity, right? Then she mentions the fourth thing about her husband, وَتَقْرِي الضَّيْف, that you look after your guests, You're generous towards your guests as well, right? And then the fifth thing she mentions about him, وَتُعِينُ عَلَى نَوَائِبِ الْحَقِّ, right? That you assist, you assist those who are afflicted by calamity, who are harmed, right? So look at all of these things that the Prophet is being consoled with, that you're helping all of these people. You're helping people who have experienced difficulty, hardship, financial hardship, physical hardship. You're always helping people. You're always serving society. So why would God harm you, right? And this is what our religion, Islam, is all about. It's all about helping people, especially those who are at the receiving end, the worst end of society, those who are impoverished, those who are struggling, those who are struggling to make ends meet, right? And so she says this to husband, and then she says, فَانْطَلَقَتْ بِهِ خَدِيجَةُ حَتَّى أَتَتْ بِهِ وَرَقَ بِن نَوْفَلٍ. And then she takes the Prophet after consoling him with her words to Waraqa bin Nawfal. Waraqa bin Nawfal is the uncle of the Khadijah, the wife of the Prophet. So she says, فَانْطَلَقَ بِخَدِيجَةُ حَتَّى أَتَتْ بِهِ وَرَقَ بِن نَوْفَلٍ bin Asad bin Abdul Uzza ibn Khadijah, right? And he was a person who remained or became, who was a Christian in that pagan environment. So he maintained his links, his faith of Christianity, right? This is وَكَانَ يَكْتُبُ الْكِتَابَ الْعِبْرَانِي. He would write the gospel in Hebrew as much as the Bible in Hebrew, as well as much as God wanted him to do. And so he was a scholar. He was a scholar of the Bible. Very, very interesting. Now you're seeing how the early Muslim community, the two people, the Prophet and Khadijah, husband and wife, are interacting with this Christian, right? This uncle of the wife of the Prophet Khadijah. وَكَانَ شَيْخًا كَبِيرًا. He was very, very old, and he had also become blind. He'd lost his eyesight. So Khadijah tells him, Ya ibn Am, Isma bin Abni Akhi. Listen to what the Prophet Muhammad has experienced. Uh, and so فقال ورقة يا ابن أخي ماذا ترى. So ورقة bin Nawfal asked the Prophet that, what did you see? فأخبره رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خبر ما رأى. So the Prophet told him what he had experienced, what he had seen. فقال له ورقة. So Waraqah, when he heard this story, this incident of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he became excited. And he said, هذا الناموس الذي نزل على موسى صلى الله عليه وسلم. Right? This is the same namus. This is the same angel. Right? Namus is, use the word as in someone from the word uns, someone who keeps secrets, i.e., the angel Gabriel, who would come to the prophet Moses, peace be upon him. Prophet Moses, who was a great prophet, of course. Um, and he says, فقال ورق هذا الناموس الذي نزل الله على موسى يا ليتني فيها جزاء. He says that, I wish I was young. I wish I was young so I could help you. Now, the interesting thing here, if you observe the text carefully, is this is a Christian scholar referring to a prophet, the prophet Moses. The question might be, why didn't he refer to the prophet Jesus? Right? He could have said, being a Christian, that this is the same Gabriel who came to the prophet Jesus. This is a question that might come across your mind. Why does he not mention the prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, being a Christian himself? And the simple answer is that, or one of the simple answers would be very simple, that because he was a scholar, he understood that this was a prophet of the Bani Israel, and the primary prophet of the Bani Israel is Moses. So he's going back to the usul, he's going back to the asl, which is the prophet uh, Musa or Musawi, right? He's referring to the Musawi tradition, the Mosaic tradition of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, right? And so the bunyad, the foundation of the Bible here, and how he understood it was coming from the prophet Moses. So this is why he mentioned the prophet Moses, though he was a Christian himself. In any case, he mentions that this is the same angel that came to the prophet Moses, And then he says, I wish يا ليتني فيها جزء, right? That I wish that I could help you. I wish I was alive. Um, that that I could be there, right? That I could have a partnership in this, right? So this is he's making a hope that he could help the prophet as well, right? uh, that I was young, right? That I was young in this period. I could assist you in this as well. So anyway, the prophet hears this from Waraqa bin Nawfal, that this is the same prophet that came to the prophet Moses. And then he says, "Laytani akunu hayyan." I wish I was alive. Is yukhrijuka qawmuk, when your community, when your people will expel you, right? So he was obviously, he knew history, and he knew that when people call for change in society, reform in society, they are not going to be accepted, right? When Muslims ask for the world to become a better place and to move away from the way our civilization is declining, and the nonsense and the corruption that is prevalent in our society, when Muslims call towards a better world, they're going to be labeled, they're going to be ostracized. You're going to be kicked out by a community. Maybe not literally, but you're going to be cancelled from certain communities, from certain platforms, right? So this is very, 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 very similar to today, right? That when you speak the truth, most people won't like what you say, or a lot of people in power will not like what you say, and they will lead the masses to turn against you. They will use propaganda to turn against you. So this scholar, Namus, the uncle of the wife of the Prophet Khadijah, right? He says, "Look, I wish I was alive so I could help you." The Prophet he is astonished by this. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أو are they going to take me out? Are they going to drive me out? قال نعم, yes. لم يأتي رجل قط بمثل ما جئت به إلا عُدِيَ. No one has ever come with similar to what you've come with, except enmity is shown towards them, except that hatred is shown towards them, right? And this has been human history. You're not going to be accepted. You're not going to be loved by mainstream society. And وَإِن يُدْرِكِ يَوْمُكَ أَنْصُرُكَ نَصْرًا مُؤَزَّرًا, that if I'm alive that day, I'll give you support. I'll support you. And then it's mentioned here that only a few days later, uh, Waraqa, the scholar, the uncle of the wife of the Prophet, passed away. And then there was a period, which I will talk about some other point, which is called the Fatar al Wahi. Revelation stopped. There was a period of time where revelation did not come to the Prophet for a certain period of time. This is the end of this hadith. In the next lesson, we will talk about this next tradition in Sahih al Bukhari, God willing. I hope you found that useful. Uh, and it's short. Thank you, Yunus. Inshallah, we'll try our best. Salam, Akhi, make small videos on this. Akhi, brother, right? You're my brother, mashallah. High quality with a good setup. Well, I hope I can do that. Um, I hope you can share it, and just knowledge, just basic good knowledge, and hopefully people can benefit, inshallah. In next video, we'll continue with the next hadith, the tradition of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Until then, stay safe. Allah keep you safe. Assalamu alaikum.